Welcome to meeting number 19 of the House and Commons Standing Committee on Government Operations and Estimates. This committee is meeting today from 3:12, so it'll be 4:12 your time. You haven't had the time change yet. So we will go as we move forward with that. We will hear from the Parliamentary Budget Officer and his officials regarding his report on the cost of Canada's surface combatants. Today's meeting is also taking place in a new web format. Webinars are for public committee meetings and are available only to members, their staff, and witnesses. Members may have remarked that the entry to the meeting was much quicker and that they immediately entered it as an active participant. All functionalities for active participants remain the same. Staff will be non-active participants only and can therefore only view the meeting in gallery view. I would like to take this opportunity to remind all participants to this meeting that screenshots or taking photos of your screen is not permitted. To ensure an orderly meeting, I would like to outline a few rules to follow. Interpretation in this video conference will work very much like in a regular committee meeting, and you have the choice at the bottom of your screen to either use Floor, English, or French. Before speaking, please wait until I recognize you by name. When you are ready to speak, you may click on the microphone icon to activate your mic. When you are not speaking, we would ask that your mic should be shut off on mute. To raise a point of order during the meeting, committee members should ensure their microphone is unmuted and say point of order to get the chair's attention. In order to ensure social distancing in the committee room, if you need to speak privately with the clerk or analysts during the meeting, please email them through the committee email address. For those people who are participating in the committee room, please note that masks are required unless seated and when physical distancing is not possible. I will now invite the Parliamentary Budget Officer to make his opening statement. Mr. Giroux, welcome again, and thank you for taking time with us once more.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's a pleasure. Monsieur le Président et Mesdames et Messieurs les...
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, Vice Chairs, and members of the committee. Thank you for the invitation to appear before you today. We are pleased to be here today to present the findings of our report entitled The Cost of Canada's Surface Combatants 2021 Update and Options Analysis, which we were honored to prepare at the request of this committee. With me today, I have our lead advisor analysts on the report, Carly Melanik and Christopher Penny. Consistent with the parliamentary BO's legislated mandate at the request of this committee, my office prepared an independent costing analysis of building the Canadian surface combatants with the continuation of the Type 26 as well as the cost of two alternate designs, the FREM and the Type 31E.
We estimate that a fleet of 15 Type 26 ships will cost $77.3 billion, rising to $79.7 billion if there's a one-year delay in 2021-22, and $82.1 billion if there's a two-year delay. This estimate represents an increase of $7.5 billion over our previous estimate, which was provided in 2019 due to updates in the ship's specifications and production timelines. As requested by the committee, our report also presents a cost analysis of two other ship designs, the FREM, European Multi-Mission Frigate, and the Type 31E, a class of general-purpose frigates planned for the United Kingdom's Royal Navy. The cost of acquiring 15 FREM ships is estimated at $71.1 billion, while the cost of a fleet of 15 ships based on the Type 31E design is estimated at $27.5 billion. These estimates are inclusive of cancellation costs, running a new competitive design selection process, and an additional 4-year delay in the start of construction. It's important to note that these ships have different characteristics and capabilities. Finally, our report considers a hybrid approach under which 3 Type 26 vessels are procured and the remaining 12 ships are competed, with either the FREM or Type 31E being selected. Under this scenario, the costs increased to $71.9 billion for the mixed FREM fleet and $37.5 billion for the mixed Type 31E fleet. We would be pleased to respond to any questions you may have regarding this report or other PBO work. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Giroux. We will now go straight into questions, and we will start with Mr. Paul Hughes. You have 6 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Donc, merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mr. Giroux, for coming back. When we look at the report, it's clear that monitoring the cost, it's clear what the Minister of Department of Defense has and what you have. What explains what D&D does not take into account when you do your assessment? First of all, there's the taxes, the provincial taxes, which are not included in D&D's estimates. In addition, it's difficult to take into account what is not being taken into account in the estimates done by D&D because we didn't have access to their model for estimating costs. We asked a lot of questions for us to be able to do our estimate of costs, and we did get most of those inquiries answered, but we didn't ask detailed questions about their way to estimate costs because our objective was to do an independent evaluation and not to do an evaluation of their way of doing things. So it's difficult for us to determine what D&D omitted in terms of costs and why there is such a discrepancy between the estimates. In other words, you're saying that if our committee had not put in the request to the PBO to get a cost estimate, we would have not got the numbers we have here. So why is there such a lack of transparency? Well, the D&D's cost estimates, the most from 76 million and forth, go back to 2017. So those estimates are a bit outdated. But D&D a few days ago reaffirmed that they're confident that their estimates from 56 to 60 some dollars are still valid. So I do not see why there is such a big gap between D&D and ourselves. I'm confident in the estimates that my office came up with that was done by Carly and Chris, who are here in attendance, and I cannot determine why D&D arrives at such low estimates. Nothing was provided to us by D&D that suggests that the cost estimates would be, much lower than what we arrived at. If we were to get more information, that would let us arrive at different costs, we would have used them, but it's not the case. Now, I would like to read something in the 2017 report. It says there is a risk at PSPC that there are insufficient resources because of a shortage in staffing with the sufficient knowledge, and which could be a number of years working for a public service. So might there be a lack of expertise at PSPC at this time that would explain things, a lack of qualified staff? Well, a program with the scope you need for Royal Navy and combat ships, that requires a great deal of expertise. But if it is a priority for public services and D&D and the government, then there is a way to allocate sufficient resources for the project to be done properly. So I don't think the lack of resources would be the only explanation. It could be a factor, but when you talk about $77 million, I think it's well worthwhile to invest lots of resources. It's well worthwhile in, investing a good 10 staff in the project. In your calculations, you did not take into account the necessary infrastructure for the docks. Did you calculate the estimate for the infrastructures needed for that particular fleet? We estimated the costs for construction. The cost that will be necessary for the shipyards to be able to build the ships, but the operational costs for the fleet, no, that was not taken account. If, for instance, the Canadian Royal Navy needs to build additional docks deeper in Halifax or Esquimalt, that is not taken into account, at least not to my knowledge. The report puts the emphasis on the development and acquisitions costs and 2 years of spare parts. Those are the only costs. In your report, you talk about a 2-year delay, but it could be even 3, 4, 5. You did talk about the Salit. Could you explain why it would take 3 or 5 years more? Yes, we did an analysis, the impact of different scenarios on costs, and 1 additional year would be $1.2 million additional, and if it was 2 years delay, it would be $4.8 million additional, because the cost would be spread up. Did you say 2.2 billion? Total cost. But this is because of inflation, because the program is over 25 or 30 years. So if you delay by 1 year, all of those expenditures are delayed, and inflation will have a bigger impact on the program. So the total would be $2.3 billion for just 1 additional year of delays.
Paul Hoos. We will now go to Mr. McKinnon for 6 minutes.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président, et merci, Monsieur Giroux, à vous.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you. And thank you to the PBO for all of the hard work done for MPs. So as Parliamentary Secretary, I've seen this program evolve a great deal in the few years that I've been around. And the first thing I can be sure of is that you would have seen a substantial increase in the estimates in, the cost estimated by a previous government, some 22 billion. And this based on what the previous government arrived at. If my memory serves me well, Mr. McKinnon, the initial cost estimate were about $26 billion for the 15 ships. So we can note, therefore, a rather systematic failure in the cost estimates when you either look at DND's estimates or yours. I'm trying to understand the discrepancy between your estimates and those of DND. And I note, you underscored this, that it is because, firstly and namely, the absence of the sales tax. And I was wondering, just on that first discrepancy, why did your methodology include the taxes, but their methodology not include the taxes? That's a good question. I think it's a question of choice. Perhaps DND does not see provincial sales tax as something irrelevant to include. We do, because it is a cost DND will have to absorb. So the choice of including the federal taxes, well, it's zero cost, because what DND would pay in GST would go back to government. But provincial taxes, it's not the case. Those would not go back to federal government. So we chose to include those taxes for reasons of transparency, and we think DND should also have included them for purposes of transparency. You will agree with me, for the other category of costs, we do really need to start the construction of that project to avoid other costs. But your report envisages the consideration of other ships, which would require a process for design, for architecture, for procurement, materials, for, combat systems, and so forth. How do you envisage the possibility of further delays in coming up with a capacity that's needed by our Navy, our combat capacity? How do you envisage the possibility of incurring yet further delays, further costs, rather than go ahead with the ships being contemplated? Well, that is a very important question, because to start from zero would imply stopping the current process and starting another call for tender, a competitive process, which would add another 4 years to the timelines and costs. Yes, and that's why in our report we considered an alternative scenario where we continue with the Type 26, up to 3 ships to minimize the negative impacts on the Royal Navy and avoid a capacity problem. But as you indicated, and as we might suppose, the D&D contemplate a series of capacities in a hybrid ship, as are the ones we're evaluating now, which they believe will serve and meet the capacity as well as generations to come. That judgment call was made. The committee asked me to estimate the costs for alternative designs, 31E and FREM, and to avoid the 4-year hole, we came up with the hybrid scenario to avoid a shortfall of capacity in the Royal Navy. So if D&D did it, so much the better. But we thought it useful to provide these cost estimates to the committee. But it's a very different ship, is essentially my point. The Type 26 compared to the FREM or the Type 31E, there's big differences in capacity and what the ships offer our Navy. Yes, we recognize in our report that the Type 31E is a smaller ship, and it doesn't have the same type of capacity, but the FREM and the Type 26 are not identical either. But they have similar capacity. France and Italy use it as their main frigates. They're not identical, but they're comparable, the FREM and the Type 26. The surface combatants will replace.
It's 6 minutes, so unfortunately you didn't get that next question, but next time. We'll go now to Ms. Vignola, 6 minutes.
Oui, merci beaucoup, Monsieur Kitchen.
Thank you very much, Mr. Giroux, for being with us again today. First, very quick question. Are you in a position to tell us why there are so many delays for the Type 26 at this time? We have no specific explanation. We took the data from D&D. We do know that the net weight of the ship has increased, so there are probably changes of specifications. We also know that Type 26 is not a ship that is currently in operation nowhere on the planet. So it is a new type of ship, and that could explain some of the delays. But we did not conduct any inquiries to determine the precise reason for the delay. Ours was a prospective analysis to estimate costs and not a retrospective analysis to look at the causes of what's already occurred. What are the main challenges for departments when they present an initial budget for this type of a project? We're talking of an increase of some 51 billion. So to have a long-term overview, what is the challenge for a department? That is a very good question. The challenges have to do with the ship's designs. That applies in any other long-term purchase. But when you buy something that has not yet been built, that doesn't even exist, there are many risks. What will the cost be? You have no basis for comparison. Then there are the specifications that are specific to each country. Each Royal Marine or each National Marine has its own specifications. Then you have the impact of, the fact that you're not buying a car. You're not buying something that already exists. You're buying, 15 samples of a ship that are going to be built over several decades. So then you have inflation. It can be significant, especially if you're talking 25 or 30 more years. So these are the risk factors for determining costs. And I think if we'd had more time, Carly and Chris could elaborate much better than I'm doing. And thank you. I hear you talk about inflation. Now, to do that, well, would it be possible for departments to improve the way they go about this? There are no doubt means, but there are many unknowns. It's much more difficult to estimate something that is, going to take 25, 30 years to produce. Then there's the risk of presenting cost estimates that are much higher than what you presented initially. If you present, a free of 75 million right at the outset, it might frighten the decision makers. If you go with a lower estimate, it's easier to get acceptability and approval for those estimates. Now, I'm not pointing the finger at anybody. I'm just saying it is difficult to point the finger at specific factors when I myself was not involved initially in estimating costs, and we haven't seen the details of those either. Thank you. Do you have an idea of how much it would cost to have 2 fleets? Right now, we have 12 Halifaxes and 3 Iroquois to replace. If we were to have a similar process, 2 fleets, would the cost be much higher now or higher in the future compared to what we have now, the frigates and the destroyers? We didn't estimate the costs, and certainly not for maintenance. A ship that costs cheaper will have lower maintenance and operations costs. So the ship, you would choose 3 of Type 26 and 12 of the Type 31E. With the 31E, the cost for maintenance would be probably lower compared to the Type 26. But that you'd have to do analysis, a specific analysis to know, and that was not part of our mandate. We weren't to estimate those costs for a hybrid fleet. But normally, when a ship costs you less to purchase, those maintenance costs are also less expensive. It's just not to say that a hybrid fleet would cost more to operate and maintain. I'm well aware that we're talking about ships that are important. These are not, Fisher-Price toy ships we're talking about. About 4 years for a development process. Is that normal if you compare with what's been done in the past in Canada or elsewhere in the world? Monsieur,
Donc, je suis pas.
I'm not a specialist in government procurement. We took that data based on what DND did for Type 26. I cannot, unfortunately, say whether it's normal. It's not something we examined. Thank you.
Ms. Vignola, and now we'll go to Mr. Green for 6 minutes.
Thank you very much and welcome back, Mr. Giroux. It's always a pleasure to have you here. I'm constantly learning through these reports and these studies, and this one for me is significant. Like, there seems to be some significant questions, and I know For other people who might be tuning in, they'll have questions in terms of the discrepancy. So maybe I'll revisit it and I'll start there about just drawing out the difference. Department of National Defense will still estimate their cost running at 50 to 60 billion. Do you expect the DND to update their estimates based on your report?
They stated that they still stand by their their estimate of 2017 a few days or weeks ago in anticipation or right after our report was tabled. They said that they still stand by that 56 to 60 billion dollars for the 15 ships. My bet is that they'll probably update it in a couple of months when it's probably less politically charged. But so far, they stand by that estimate.
And they would be led by, I'm looking back at some previous documents, back in 2015 when we had the 5-year review of this program. Are these guys part of the National Shipbuilding Procurement Strategy Secretariat? Are they the project operations for this program?
I don't know about that specific question. Carly and Chris may jump in. They probably know more about that.
Actually, I don't have an answer either. Certainly, the Canadian Surface Combatant is part of the National Shipbuilding Strategy. As for which secretariat is involved, I'd have to look it up.
I'm trying to get a sense for it's irreconcilable for me that they would do a cost analysis and not include the taxes. That is material and astounding. And I'm wondering, just so that we're clear and on the record, there's no credit system in which these taxes are recouped or not charged, right? There's no plausible scenario in which these provincial taxes are waived or not charged. Is that right?
That's right. Certainly not to my knowledge. And if there's one, it involves billions of dollars over the lifespan of this project. And it would be very useful for us to know if such a plan exists, because to my knowledge, there's no such scheme or arrangement.
That to me is unconscionable that they would just overlook that. And that, when we talk about politically charged, that feels like a politically charged analysis when you have that material non-disclosure within your bidding processes. That's one aspect in terms of the cost overrun and the dispute between you and the DND. I won't say between you and the DND, between the disputed numbers of the two organizations. So the result is from the interpretations of the tax, but there's also some pretty complicated weight-based calculations, if I'm correct. Can you clarify how you played into the weight-based calculation?
Sure. So,
and what the differences were between your calculations and the DND?
So light ship weight is a very important parameter in our models. But apparently some stakeholders are saying that we over-rely on this parameter. But we disagree with that, of course. It's important to note that in the costing literature, because we've looked at that, numerous studies identify the relationship between light ship weight and the construction cost of surface combatants as being the single most important factor. So the approach we've taken is also reflecting best practices suggested by NATO and other independent organizations such as the United States Congressional Budget Office.
And I'm not oversimplifying it. We've heard in previous testimony the discrepancies between the capabilities, and I'm to think that the ambitious project that started out some years ago with these design elements to kind of cram all of this warfare onto one ship would probably have an outstanding impact on the weight and the cost and the timeline analysis. Would that be accurate or fair to say?
I think it's a very, very accurate or very right analogy. It's probably a very good way of describing it.
And so, from your perspective, when you went down this path, did you receive any information that quantified or verified the need for this type of capability and design, or did you leave it up to the DND to assess the requirements?
Carly can probably clarify that point better than I could.
Hi, thank you for the question. We effectively did take the specifications as given and provided by the Department of National Defense We are not capability experts, but of course we do need to factor into the account that there are differences in capabilities that could explain the differences in cost.
And I think it begs the question, although this isn't for you to answer, about the need of these particular capabilities in the global theater of defense or of war. And, you know, like for me, I can't unpack this from the national shipbuilding strategy, and I can't help but think about the cost overruns as having an effect and an impact on some of our other programs. Or if we took a more astute approach to this, what that $16 billion or maybe $20 billion differential might look like if we were to apply it to other aspects of the shipbuilding strategy. I do recognize I'm at 6 minutes, and I'll respect that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Green. I appreciate that. And now we'll go to the second round, and we'll 5 minutes with Mr. Bazan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I want to thank Mr. Giroux and everybody at the PBO for this report. And I guess, you know, the one thing that I'm trying to reconcile here is you looked at different types of ships, but did you drill down into, you know, what it's costing us as Canadian taxpayers based upon the way that we have the management and the contracting established, and whether or not there's been a competitive process that is in the best interest of the taxpayer and get the ships that we need for the Royal Canadian Navy?
So there's a lot to unpack in your question. So the way we have approached the costing, we took a top-down approach. So using analog ships and comparing what has been spent in other countries to procure similar ships and taking that into the Canadian context, adjusting for productivity, the size of ships, and so on. So we didn't look at the differences in capabilities, but that's probably a big factor in the cost increase compared to what it could cost. We also did not look at procuring these ships abroad and upgrading them to Canadian specificities, because procuring it abroad was not within the scope of our study, but there would
and I'm not
of,
suggesting at all, Mr. Giroux, about procuring I'm just saying a better competitive process, a better management system right here in Canada, so that we can keep, you know, because every time we turn around, the cost of shipbuilding, but specifically the surface combatants, continues to rise exponentially.
And that's a very good point. This project has seen delays, changes in specifications, but personally, I think there's an issue of maybe governance, because we've chosen the naval shipyard, we've chosen the type of ship, and then the costs are almost byproducts of these two decisions. So, but honestly, I don't have an answer as to whether it's the competitive process that needs to be improved, whether it's the type of specifications. We really did look at the cost, but we didn't look at the governance of the project or whether something went wrong. I think my colleague, the Auditor General, would probably be in a much better position to determine whether changes or improvements need to be made or should have been made to the process.
I appreciate that, and that's a question I'm going to have for when we have her before committee. I guess there's some discrepancies, of course, and you're talking about the different values of ships, the 31E versus the FREM versus the surface combatant, and we always have the Canadianization. And you did talk about the statement of requirements that you got from the D&D on behalf of the Navy. So the question comes down to, because you do have such a low value on the smaller frigate, the Type 31E, how much are we giving up on capability, and how much is that going to be putting our Navy and our sovereignty at risk if we go to a small ship versus having the surface combatants that can handle both anti-submarine warfare as well as air threats?
So it depends who you talk to when you ask that question. If you talk to the Naval Officers Association of Canada, they'll say Type 31E, for example, would be a significant loss of capabilities. If you talk to the Danes or the shipyard that's building these types of ships, they say it's not the same capabilities, but it's still a fully capable ship. If you talk to the British, for example, they'll say it's a very good ship compared to what could be the alternative, especially if it's patrolling alongside bigger ships such as the FREM or the Type 26. So not being a military expert myself and not being an expert in military doctrine, I cannot really pronounce, but I've heard both arguments saying that it would be a terrible loss of capabilities, or I've also heard that it would be a very capable type of ship, especially if we went for the mixed or the hybrid fleet, that would be fully capable of doing what the Navy needs to be done. And I can't pronounce, not being an expert in that area myself.
Okay, you talked about the FREM, which both the Italians and the French have built, but you're using the Constellation class estimates coming from the U.S. Congressional Office, the Congress Budget Officer. And I tried to, I know I asked you this in the past, but why not use the hard numbers that actually came out of Italy and France, who built dozens of these ships and have a lot of experience? And when you're using the estimates coming from the States, which are actually based upon the Arleigh Burke, which is an air destroyer.
I'll ask Chris if he can provide an answer to that question.
Certainly. Pardon me.
Excuse me for interrupting there, Mr. Penny. I appreciate your answer. I'm wondering if you could maybe put that in writing. It's a good question, but unfortunately we're out of time. And so if you could answer that in writing to the committee, that would be greatly appreciated. Mr. Drouin, 5 minutes.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur.
Thank you very much, Chair. I actually will give some of my time to get an answer to my colleague's question.
Okay, so the reason for using the Constellation class, there are a couple. First, that it is the most recent adaptation of the FREM. As you stated, the analog approach is based on the Arleigh Burke. This mirrors the approach of the Congressional Budget Office. It is a very good analog once proper adjustments are made. It is a general purpose frigate, which is, what is the Type 26 is intended for. So I should also note that we're not using the CBO estimates for our own estimates. We're not using their estimates as raw data. We are using the Arleigh Burke as an analog. So it is a similar approach to what the Congressional Budget Office had undertaken. I believe that answers your question. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Mr. Giroux, and thank you for coming before our committee. I have a question. When you did the hybrid analysis for the acquisition of the 3 ships Type 26, for example, and the other be it FREM or the Type 31E, when you do the cost analysis, well, what I want to get at is to purchase 15 versus 3, regardless of, the company, there would be a difference in price. So how did you go about it to determine the difference? Good question. Well, what we did was we estimated the costs that were already incurred to construct the Type 26. To date, at least, and then we continued until the construction of the 3 Type 26. And then we analyzed the cost to start over the competitive process, including the other ship, including the costs to, upgrade the shipyard, to recalibrate all of the equipment and what's necessary to build another ship. So we include all of the costs to continue the construction of one ship and to start almost at zero in terms of productivity and know-how to build a different type of ship. And that's how we arrive at the cost of the hybrid for the FREM and the Type 31. But you didn't have a conversation with the company itself to see if the costs would be the same in terms of, I mean, if you divide by 15, it's cheaper than you build 3. They're 3 versus 15. It's significant, no? We did take that into account in our cost estimates. We also took into consideration that in general with shipbuilding, the firsts are more expensive. So then you have economy of scales because the more you build, you optimize your costs at around the 9th ship. So you take that into account when you start building a new ship. That would have been the 4th. So we also took into account that there would be adjustments need to be made in the shipyard itself to adjust the construction chain. You also said you used a kind of software program, True Planning. And if I've read your report correctly, you say there could be added value of plus 20% or minus 20%. What led you to say that? We used a model that bases itself on different parameters to estimate the total cost for the purchase of a ship. And we used it to do a retrospective analysis. What would have come to if we'd used that for known costs, known acquisition projects that have been used elsewhere in the world? And we arrived in some cases at plus 20 and in other cases minus 20. And that's how we determined our trust interval. And the estimates we arrive at in our report are the midway points. You could have an overrun of 20% or savings of 20%, but our model arrives at that midpoint, and those are the figures in our report. All right, so if I look at all of the type 26, the worst case scenario would be 20% more than 77.3 million, and the best scenario would be 77.3 minus 20% of the established cost. That is the exact description of what I just explained. Thank you.
And we will now go to Ms. Vignola for 2.5 minutes.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you, Mr. Kitchen. Let's suppose for a couple seconds, if you think back to my last question, I talked about the 4 years for the design. But let's say the government decides to change model completely and to go with a FREM. Would there be any elements in the design, the 4 years it took for the design, that would be transferable to the FREM, or would you have to start everything from scratch? How did you calculate? We calculated that to arrive at the point we are now, if the decision were to be taken now, well, we meant October. If the decision were taken in October to start over, it'd take about 4 years to get to the same point. There are probably some elements, where you wouldn't, but I don't think there are many. And if there are many, it would accelerate the process, and so much the better. It would reduce costs, but I don't think there would be many. And that is why we arrive at 4 years to get to the same starting point if we were to start the tendering process and the design process. So with this explosion in costs, and we talked about that earlier, that is inflation, among other things, I expect the changes anyway in terms of functions, the armaments. What place does that take on each of the ships in terms of costs? Well, we're talking about an area there's a lot of confidentiality and secrecy. So there's some elements that are more important when it comes to defense. There's not much sharing of information, not much sharing of best practices. It's not like other types of procurement where you can easily buy a competitor's product, take it apart, see what improvements you can make to your construction chain. And that's why there's a lot of inflation when it comes to defense, because it's very difficult to adopt the best practices already tested by others. Armaments is a very important aspect, of course. The other aspect are the construction materials. Especially if they're ones that are not easily substituted for.
Ms. Vignola. And now Mr. Green, 2.5 minutes.
Still can't seem to get off the tax thing. It's really, I can't share with you how much that's bothering me. So I'm going to get to cut to the chase here. What information did the DND provide with you to assist with your report? And did they withhold any information, in your opinion?
In my opinion, they provided all the information that we needed. There was a lot of back and forth, of course, because it's not a simple project. We cannot just get a 2-page document or an Excel spreadsheet, but they provided all the information that we needed. We didn't get the contracts because we didn't need the contracts. We got all the information that was relevant for the determination of the cost that we needed to do for this committee. So in my opinion, DND was as forthcoming and open as one could have expected in the provision of information for this report. And I see Chris and Carly, they're not doing something like that. So I think that's an accurate description.
No, that's fair. That's fair. And just to play this out, if we were to receive your report, not take action, accept their estimates, we go ahead with it. 4 years down the line, there's a oops, I guess we were wrong. The Canadians are on the hook for the $20 billion overrun, and there's accountability where?
Accountability rests with those who ultimately make the decisions in
That's a
our
great
parliamentary.
Answer.
Yeah.
That's a great answer. I'll accept that. You noted that your estimates account for the differences of approximately 55% unit labor cost premiums. How did your office calculate the anticipated labor productivity at the Irving shipyard?
It's not based on any wrongdoing or anything against the Canadian shipyards. It's just based on the fact that Canadian shipyards don't have the same experience in building military vessels as, for example, the US, where it's almost a constant production line where they churn out military vessels.
What would be our comparative scale in terms of production? Because again, we're hearing about capabilities, and it's clear to me that even with this $80 billion investment, when we're up against countries who are spending in the trillions of dollars, this is a drop in the bucket globally. So in terms of it being a sovereign threat, does our sovereignty rest on the procurement of these vessels?
That's not for me to answer that question. I personally think that's an interesting question, but I'll let brighter minds than me answer that question, especially people who are more versed in military doctrine.
Thank you, Mr. Giroux, and thank you, Mr. Green. We will go to Mr. McCauley for 5 minutes.
Great. Thanks, everyone, for joining us. Mr. Giroux, you mentioned that you're not a specialist in government procurement. I would put forward that the government is not a specialist in government procurement either. Curious, how much are we at for sunk costs right now?
That's an interesting question. I'm going through my notes here, and so we have a lot of information from DND, but because some of it is commercially sensitive, there are some types of information and data that we cannot release publicly. And the ballparks on our sunk costs so far is unfortunately part of that commercially sensitive information provided to us by DND.
How much are the costs overruns or the added costs due to delays, and how much to added costs such as weight or other changes made by DND?
Well, in general, if a 2-year delay had pushed back all production, we'd expect a number to be between $4.4 and $4.8 billion in terms of additional costs. But based on the most recent figures we have from DND, sorry, Mr. McCauley?
Delays to date, not additional delays, but delays to date. Because I recall sitting in committee actually a couple of years ago hearing, we were going to start cutting steel in 2023. And actually, I think the minister at the time even stated we'd have ship and water I think it was 2025, which is obviously not going to happen. So how much of this cost is from these continual delays from day one?
Do you have that information, Carly?
We don't have those explicit numbers split out, unfortunately. It's potentially something we could go back and do. I would equate it roughly to what the 1 year and 2 year delay costs would be, because that's roughly what the delays were. As for the light ship weight increase, it did increase the cost, but again, I do not have that exact number available.
Okay. Your pricing, is that based on the ships being in water, or is that based on delivery before becoming operational, which of course takes another year or 2 years run up?
That's based on delivery to the Royal Canadian Navy and also being usable, to the best of my knowledge.
Okay. D&E commented again, following up Mr. Green was saying about the difference in your pricing, their pricing. Of course, taxes, and they commented the weight. But D&D says they're still valid. Their costing is still valid. But there's still the weight issue. Are they disagreeing with the 7,800 light ship weight that you are using? Are they still using a different weight, or are they saying your costs, their projected weight is same as yours, but your costing is out? Are you muted, Mr. Giroux?
Damn, I knew it would happen to me. Sorry. So we're using the light ship weight based on information provided to us by D&D. So we did not just make this up. So that's the light ship weight that's based on the most recent information.
The same light ship weight, but they're saying your interpretation of the added cost from light ship weight is different than theirs.
Well,
which is interesting, because D&D told me years ago that they had already factored in higher costs from a higher weight, but now they're saying that the higher weight will not be a higher cost.
That's a mystery to me. As a taxpayer, I hope that their cost estimate ends up being the right one, but I'm very confident that our cost estimate, the 77 billion, is the right one, is the accurate one.
Okay. The life cycle costs, the ONS, is going to be, perhaps 250, 300 billion. How do those costs match up to strong secured engaged numbers, or compared to what we currently have set aside for S&O for the whole of our armed forces?
I haven't looked at the operations and maintenance cost for these surface combatants, but it's true that they add up to a significant portion. They're very likely to be way more than the acquisition cost. And I don't have the numbers as to what proportion of the overall defense budget they would take, unfortunately.
Thank you, Mr. Giroux, and thank you, Mr. McCauley.
Thank you.
We will now go to Mr. Johari for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and welcome back, Mr. Giroux, to you and your colleagues. Really like to bring the focus into the hybrid model and really probe into 3 areas. One is really the alignment of that model with the overall the strategy, the factor of economy of scale, as well as the total cost of the ownership over the longer term. And finally, the capacity building. Let me start with the alignment. Do you think the hybrid model that's being proposed or was studied is actually aligned with the strategy that the DND has and presented in their NSS?
That's a question really that DND would probably be much better placed to answer, although I can probably guess what their answer would be. And I would say that the UK Royal Navy is envisaging something along the lines of a hybrid model where they will have some Type 26 and also some smaller frigates, Type 31E, because primarily my understanding is cost concerns.
Okay, thank you. Let's touch on the economy of scale. Do you believe as we build more of the 26 model, then the actual cost of the ship goes down? And just by building 3 and then going to that hybrid model, the overall cost would be more. And did you take the economy of scale into account when you were building your model of the cost model for the Type 26?
Yeah, that's a good point. We did fully take into account economies of scale and the increase in productivity as the shipyard gains more experience and the Navy gains more experience with these ships. So building the Type 26, if we were to go with the full fleet of 15 Type 26, the cost that we have in our report take into account the economies of scale. Going with 15 FREM or 15 Type 31E takes into account economies of scale, and same with the hybrid fleet, where it's 3 Type 26 and either 12 of FREM or Type 31E. It all takes into consideration the fact that we have small economies of scale for Type 26, and we have to start from scratch in the alternate design, and we have economies of scale as the shipyard becomes more adept at building these types of ships. So it's all taken into consideration.
Yeah, thank you. And I know you just said that in your comments, you said that you haven't take a look at the long term and the total operating costs. But having a little bit of a program management background, when I look at any type of project, I look at the long term. What are your thoughts around the cost of the ownership of a hybrid type of fleet, as well as opposed to one type of fleet?
So it's certain that having two sets of spares to maintain, and as somebody pointed out to me a couple of days ago, on both coasts adds to the cost. That being said, if you have a lower cost type of ships, usually operations and maintenance costs are also proportionately lower, which could offset the additional costs of having two types of ship in the same fleet. Could or could not. But that's something that would need to be looked at in more details if there was one option that was favored over the others.
Yeah, and last question quickly. Having learned from COVID-19 and the manufacturing of vaccine and what happened over the last 10 years, would you suggest for us to look into another aspect of this project with the fact that we are building, in-home capacity from a longer strategic point of view, so we're not caught in the same position as we caught with the manufacturing of COVID vaccine?
That's a very good question, and I think that's a central point of the National Shipbuilding Strategy. And that's a decision, as I said before, on other aspects for brighter minds than me to make. So it's for people like you, elected by Canadians, for you to make these trade-offs. But that I agree with you. It's a very important point to take into consideration.
Mr. Chair, how much time do I have left?
You have 35 seconds.
35 seconds. Let me close by asking you the following question. What are the job impact or economic job impact if we actually look at the hybrid model and outsource some of these ships to other countries?
So in all of our scenarios in our report, the ships would be built in Canada. So there is no scenario under which ships would be built abroad. So all the ships would be built in Canada, even under a hybrid scenario.
Thank you, Mr. Johari. Mr. Bazan, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I guess we talked about, kind of the management of the contract on the service combatants, and we've alluded to the governance structure. And, we've seen, many delays in the construction of the service combatant. Now we're talking it's going to be potentially 7 years to get the first ship in the water. I think everybody's concerned about that. And we saw that the surface combatant, from when the original thought process was and capabilities was supposed to be a 5,400 ton ship, and now we're up to 7,800 tons. So how much has the governance and the moving target in that the statement of requirements has changed over time, has contributed to this escalating cost, and how do we fix it so that we can get a handle on it so we don't see these continuing to escalate going forward?
Short answer is I don't know the extent to which governance has contributed to this. However, choosing a ship that has not yet been built anywhere increases the risk. So that's probably one important aspect, choosing a design on paper as opposed to choosing another type of ship that had already been built and for which costs to a certain extent were known, would probably have reduced the risk somewhat, but not entirely. It all depends on the specifications that the Royal Canadian Navy has and the tailoring of that other ship that would have been made. With respect to the governance, that'll be a very good question for specialists in that area to look at, notably the Auditor General. But like you, I'm concerned about the cost increase of this type of procurement because we're talking dozens of billions of dollars in increase when it comes to cost, and there doesn't seem to be a clear rationale, at least not one that's obvious to me when it comes to explaining these cost increases.
So whether it's mismanagement by the Liberal government, whether it's ongoing delays and moving targets, creating these increased costs, you can't say how much each type of indecision has created increased cost because of the delays that are mounting up or changes of design. And there's a whole question about the life cycle cost, which you didn't even look at. We're asked to, I know that, but when we start looking at life cycle costs, like that's going to be exponential when taxpayer gets hit with the bill.
I can't say mismanagement at all. What I can say is misalignment of incentives. You ask people who will not be in charge of paying, what do they want? Of course, they'll want the best for themselves and for the generations to follow. But people who have to make the decisions are not experts in that specific area, and they don't have as clear an idea as to the costs of this or the alternatives. So the incentive alignments are not like perfect, to say the least.
So as we go forward, and I'm a fan of making sure that we get the Navy what they need, not necessarily what they want, but what they need. And because of the size and scope of our Navy, and that we aren't going to have the same scales of economy that the Americans have, for example, who how many Arleigh Burkes did they build? It was in the 50s or higher, I believe. So they got economies of scale with all their ships, and they're gearing up to a 330 plus ship Navy. But then we also have to look at our adversaries, and we know that the Russians have really increased capabilities in their Navy in recent years, especially in their submarine fleet. And then you look at what's happening with mainland China and the People's Liberation Army Navy. So the threat environment has increased, and we need to have capability to match that on both the East and West Coast, and never mind the Arctic. And at least we're getting the AOPS up there. But what are the things that you would recommend? I know you gave three options, but if and I look at the one option, which is you build the first three surface combatants, and then you move to the FREM design. The difference there is, not even $7 billion. That could easily be blown through just in the Canadianization of the FREM and trying to match up capabilities on the surface combatants to the FREMs. Did you do that type of analysis, or how do we make the surface combatant more comparable to the FREM with capabilities on board?
So unfortunately, I don't have the mandate to look into the difference in capabilities, and I don't have the expertise, even though Carly and Chris are very smart. We don't have that capacity. However, I'd say that at $77 billion for 15 Canadian surface combatants, I'm worried that the Navy may get these 15 ships, but the the cost might be having to forego other types of ships that would be beneficial for Canada's defense at the same price tag. For example, 77 billion, we get 15 ships under the current procurement program. Maybe there's a way to get smaller ships or different ships, but for the same price, having submarines or other types of ships that would be beneficial for the Navy and for Canada's sovereignty. However, I cannot pronounce on this and the mix of these different ships, but because I don't have the expertise in military needs and military doctrine, but that's the type of questions that I think are worth asking.
Thank you, Mr. Giroux, and thank you, Ms. Bazan. We'll go to Mr. Weiler for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'd also like to thank Mr. Giroux and the other esteemed witnesses that we have taking part in our committee meeting today. I want to touch on some things that were raised in the Naval Association of Canada response report that was submitted as part of the study. They mentioned in the 2017 study on the subject that PricewaterhouseCoopers concluded that the local economic and tax benefits would allow Canada to build the CSC for 13% less than had they been ordered from a European yard. The reason for this is clear. While the need to retool the Canadian shipbuilding industry may create inefficiencies and drive up costs in the short and medium term, the overall economic and tax benefits compensate the government for that premium. And Irving Shipbuilding, for instance, calculates that 1/3 of its labor costs comes back to the federal and provincial government in wages and taxes alone. And I think you spoke a little bit to these efficiencies when you mentioned that after the 4th ship is built, we would start to see some of those. They also say that there's a great deal more complexity behind the economics and strategic value of shipbuilding than such simple cost comparisons tend to yield. And the rationale for the NSS was to ensure that defense dollars spent would be sunk back into the Canadian economy. And I mention this because Seaspan's operations are just outside of my riding. I have many constituents that work there, and while they're not part of delivering or producing the CSC, it's a key beneficiary in the NSS, and it's delivering several ships as part of that strategy. So in your report, you note that there are several costs that you can't or chose not to take into account. And given that the CSC program was designed in part to develop a made in Canada industry for future domestic shipbuilding, did you consider the losses to local economies and future procurement if the development of a made in Canada shipbuilding sector wasn't expanded?
So that's an interesting aspect. In all of the scenarios in our report, all the ships would indeed be built in Canada. So the loss of Canadian expertise or strategic aspects would not be significantly different because the ships would all be built domestically. What we looked at was the difference in cost of the different designs that could have been chosen or that could be chosen if we were, for example, to go with a hybrid model. With respect to the strategic objectives of having a domestic shipbuilding capacity, that's outside of the scope of the report. And these are aspects that are difficult to put a price tag on, but that are important considerations for decision makers like yourselves, members of the committee. But again, we didn't touch that in the report. But what is important to keep in mind, though, is that regardless of the type of ships that would be chosen, in our reports, the assumptions are that they would all be built in Canada. We did not consider outsourcing to other countries or buying ships that would be built abroad.
Thanks for that answer. And does your report take into account the economic losses that the further delays that you outline would have on the Canadian economy?
No, that was not the scope of the report. Was not to determine or quantify the economic benefits to the economy, the broader economy, or the losses of a delay. There would be costs, of course, incurred if we were to cancel Type 26 and start all over from the beginning of the competitive process, but we did not factor the cost to the Canadian economy at large of a delay, a 4-year delay, or of switching between different types of designs.
And in the AG report, it states that the government took steps to minimize the expected reduction in activities at Irving by, amongst other actions, building 2 additional Arctic and offshore patrol ships. These actions were taken to avoid delays in the CSE that could arise from the shipyard having to rebuild its workforce, and were estimated to save $890 million. So with this in mind, would it be fair to say that there would be economic impacts under scenario 1 and 2 due to possible interruptions in production?
It's clear that under scenario 1, where we would stop all activities on Type 26 and start the procurement process from the start, there would certainly be losses. That's why we went for a hybrid fleet where we would continue the production of Type 26. And in the meantime, while the ships are being built, then the government could launch another process, choose a different type of ship to minimize the losses to the shipyard and to the economy. So that's why we went with a model where there would be a hybrid fleet.
Thank you. And Mr. Chair, how long do I have left?
1 second.
Thank you, Mr.
There goes the bell. Perfect. Thank you very much. Ms. Vignola, 2.5 minutes.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Chair. Earlier, you said that with your scenario, you would concentrate construction in Canada. Now, would it also be in only one shipyard? I'm going to ask Carly. That's a good question. Yes, all of the construction activities would be at Irving in Halifax. In your opinion, would the cost be different if more than one shipyard had been involved in the construction of the Type 26 frigates? That's a good question. Generally, if you spread construction amongst several shipyards, you risk suffering a productivity loss. If you specialize your activities in each of the shipyards involved, for example, one shipyard does one part, another shipyard does a different part of the, you can have economies of scale. So it would depend on how the type of work was distributed. Now, in terms of time, would that distribution on the basis of specialization, as you've just explained in your response, would it also allow for economies in time? It's possible. If you spread the work around different shipyards, you could have an accelerated delivery time, but it might be detrimental to the costs, which brings me back to my answer to your first question. In your opinion, the fact of having discarded the Davie shipyard going back to 2015, the year when it won the prize for the best shipyard in North America, the fact of discarding Davies, does that have any consequences for the price? That's a factor we did not look into in our different scenarios. No shipyard other than Irving or where other shipyards would be involved. So that's a question I unfortunately cannot answer with any degree of certitude. Thank you very much. Earlier, my colleague was talking about an association, shipbuilding association in Canada. Sorry. Very quickly, yes. He mentioned that Type 31 could take care of, essential combat activity. Which combat are you talking about? We're talking about Type 31 not being the same. They are ships that are developed to support bigger ships, but they are warships that are capable of doing a good part of the work by themselves. And that was confirmed by Odensk Maritime, a builder of some of those ships, and they're very enthusiastic. So that question, of course, has different answers depending who you ask the question of. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Green, 2.5 minutes.
The Office of the PVO, you noted in 2017 that the UK's Royal Navy awarded a contract for 3.7 billion pounds to BAE Systems for the manufacture of the first 3 Type 26 ships. And based on that estimate, the contract would suggest a cost of about $31 billion for a fleet of 15 ships. But these comparisons assumes a linear relationship between the number of ships and the cost. That seems pretty basic to me. But according to this, that you've stated that BAE Systems are more experienced and have greater efficiency and productivity. I'll cut right to the chase here. Why is Irving Shipyard less efficient and productive than BAE's system shipyards? And were these productivity theories applied to some of the other potential procurement applicants?
So first of all, when looking at costs of other shipbuilding or other procurement processes abroad, we have to be careful that to ensure that we're comparing the same costs. Very often, these other costs don't include procurement and the work that has to be done before the steel starts being cut, and they tend to underestimate the total cost. So that's an important aspect. The other aspect is that because these other shipyards abroad, they produce more of these ships, generally speaking, not specifically that type of ship, they can have higher productivity, and which is not the same. It's not the case in Canada. So that's a very quick answer to a question.
I don't know if this is something you would have come across, but do we know like what was Irving's profitability last year? Like,
I don't know.
What's the size and scale of Irving versus the other shipbuilding companies?
I don't know. I don't have that information off the top of my head. We could get back to you on that, though.
It's just the scope and this, again, the scale in which these cost overruns are in leaps and bounds, kind of going beyond what seems to be reasonable, what seems to be an order of magnitude of understandable. Again, I'll reiterate as a comment, not for you to comment on, but the idea that they would omit taxes is just such a basic and glaring omission. You talked about incentives. And I think from this committee, we're going to have to find recommendations that are going to have better systems in place that has accountability over the procurement of our military spending, which quite frankly seems to be running completely out of control on a project like this. So I think that's my time, and I'll end with that comment and hope that we can find some productive solutions.
Thank you, Mr. Green. And now we'll go to Mr. Paul Hughes, 5 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Monsieur...
Thank you very much, Mr. Giraud. You mentioned that DND would review the costs of the project. Do you think they would not have already done the estimate, given that your figures are higher? Well, it's a hypothesis. I have nothing to confirm that hypothesis, and nor do I have nothing, to deny it. I base, myself on the good faith of our high-level civil servants. From the beginning, I've listened to all of the questions and all of the responses, and I have here the results on the 2019-2020 results. And so we see PSPC defending, shipbuilding, but the minister cannot come and testify before we hear about the supplementary estimates. We're talking about billions of dollars, billions and billions of dollars that concerns the minister. And we do have questions, and I would like to move a motion ties in with what we have just talked about today, that the chair of the committee writes to the Minister of Public Services and Procurement on behalf of members of this committee in order to express their serious concerns in relation to the minister's lack of availability to testify before this committee to answer their questions related to procurement, including the Canadian surface combatants during the study of the Supplementary Estimate C, the deadline for which adoption being March 23rd. That's my motion, Mr. Chair.
So Mr. Paul Hughes has the floor and has put forward a motion. Is there any discussion on that motion?
Absolument.
And just hold on for a second, if you would, Mr. Duran. I'm going to bring up, just in case someone pushes the hands up on their thing. I have it up now, so thank you. Mr. Duran, go ahead.
I took a few notes, but I believe that Mr. Paul Hughes is asking is that the Honourable Minister be asked to testify in regard to the supplementary estimate C? Yes, that's it, Mr. Chairman. Do I have the floor?
Sorry, Mr. McKinnon, I see is next. And then Ms. Vignola, and then Mr. Green.
If I've understood, we have not received the motion in writing. If I've understood, my colleague, Mr. Paul Hughes, has tabled a motion to schedule a minister during the course of a study on shipbuilding. I don't see how this motion relates to the study or the work we're doing today. Mr. Chair, if I may. Thank you. Thank you very much. On the contrary, Mr. McKinnon, directly related to the astronomical costs that we've seen for this project. In the supplementary estimate C, we have budgets for which the minister is responsible for. So I can reread the motion. We are asking the chair to write to the minister to ask her to appear before our committee, because it's been months and months that Minister Anand has not addressed the issues of our committee. So we would like our chair to kindly ask the minister to come and see her. It's been a long time. We miss her, and we have many questions for her. Mr. Chair, if I've understood, I do not see the connection between this motion and the work we're conducting today. Second, there's mention of astronomical costs that the Conservatives estimated to be, as the parliamentary budget officer had estimated at $26 billion. So I think this is a slippery slope when it comes to costs. Third, I believe we're trying to schedule the appearance of a minister for a study of supplementary estimate C. So I don't see how this motion could be useful. And Mr. Chairman, once again, I ask you, what is the link between the work we're conducting today and an invitation to a minister to justify credits in the context of a shipbuilding project?
Thank you, Mr. McKinnon. I appreciate that. And when I look at the motion that I have, and as I see it before me, the issue is to write a letter to the minister to ask the minister to attend to the meeting on issues of subseas. And what I am understand, and when we look at subseas, that the Canadian Surface Combats are contained within that, and therefore I see that as being related, and thus I'm ruling that this is in order.
Okay, well, I think just on that, if I might suggest, Mr. Chair, politely, that you simply turn to the clerk and ask him if things are going well with respect to scheduling the minister for her subseas appearance. I think we could probably avoid a lot of nonsense here.
The issue of the minister, I can tell you, is we have tried to have the minister. We've addressed that issue in previous meetings. And Mr. McKinnon, we, at that number of meetings ago, we had talked about sending a letter to the minister, to which you had indicated that you would discuss as best you could to try and ask the minister to attend. And our discussions with the minister are such that her attendance would be at a certain date. We asked if she could attend on when we were not sitting, and she could not. And so my understanding of this letter is basically asking in writing for that issue. With that said, I think the analyst, the analyst, if you'd like to make a comment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As member will recall, they agreed to study the subsea with the departmental results reports, and the departmental results reports do have some elements linked to the national shipbuilding strategy.
Thank you for that, Raphael. With that, we will now go to Ms. Vignola.
Je sais.
I know that the minister, just like all our ministers, are extremely busy. Nonetheless, I do think we should be able to talk with her so that she can shed light on a number of aspects to the budget. I know that, like a number of colleagues wonder whether we should be inviting her to the committee, but there is a responsibility that goes beyond just your party, is how the taxpayers' money is spent. And we do need to be able to ask questions of those responsible, regardless of their party affiliation. That's what I had to say. Thank you.
Mr. Green, I saw your hand was up. It went down for a second, and I see Mr. Duran as well, but I will go to you, Mr. Green, first. I think you're still...
I will, with integrity, share with you that I changed my mind and I put it back on, so I will cede the floor to Mr. Drouin because it wasn't a technical glitch. Okay. I changed my mind, so I'll go back on the speaker's list after Mr. Drouin. Thank you for that.
Thank you. Mr. Drouin?
Mr. Chair, I'm just wondering through you or through the clerk whether or not we've had other information as to whether the minister can attend before the date that I'm assuming she communicated with the clerk, because I'll agree with my colleague, Mr. McKinnon. We're just spinning our wheels here. We can write another letter, but I would assume that the answer that would come back would probably be the same. And just on that, nothing is stopping members from asking questions on the subseas on the date that the ministers has provided to this particular committee. We are only sitting 2 weeks in March, and I think that's the issue here. If we were sitting 4 weeks, it'd be a lot easier to find scheduled time. So so we're going to send a letter, that's the point, and I'm assuming we're going to get the same answer back, but hey, if that's what the committee wants to do, I'm okay, but I will disagree with our strategy here.
Thank you, Mr. Drouin. Mr. Green.
Yeah, I'll pick up where my friend left off. I think if it's the will of this committee that we put it out, and if the minister continues to not make herself available, then that will be duly noted. But I think that when a committee calls for a witness, whomever it may be, that it's incumbent that if it's the will of this committee, that's the direction that we go in. And to treat it as an administrative inconvenience or a scheduling inconvenience from the minister is not really our problem, quite frankly. And I'm ready to vote on this. And if it's the case the minister can't find the time to show up to the committee that they're responsible for on this particular issue, then so be it.
Thank you, Mr. Green. Mr. Paul Hughes, I believe you have the last hand up.
Non, écoutez, merci, monsieur.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Just as I mentioned earlier, we, have the connection with the work we're doing. We've had many questions from the parliamentary sector. We have the connection between the 2019-2020 report with the mention of costs for the shipyard expenditures, and the minister didn't have time to come and answer questions on that report. So we'd just like to kindly invite the minister. I know that Mr. McKinnon likes to speak on her behalf as parliamentary secretary, but we'd like to hear from the minister to answer our questions. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Paul Hughes. I do see Mr. McKinnon's hand is up. Is that correct, Mr. McKinnon? Sorry, you're on mute.
Indeed, she is the minister, and she has shown herself to be available. Her office is trying to schedule a time so that all members of the committee can hear from her, and I assure you, Mr. Paul Hoos, and all the other colleagues on this committee that our minister is managing her files very well, and we will hear from her. But I suggest we vote. I will be opposed to this motion, which is useless and distraction, and aims at embarrassment. But this is a minister who has shown great deal of availability for this committee as well as other committees of the House, and she will come and inform us about the estimates with pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate that for everyone's comments. Seeing no more hands up, I am asking all those in favor of this motion, please raise your hands. And let me see, I'm just 1, 2, 3, 4. Where are we looking at here?
Mr. Chair, if I may.
Certainly.
Pursuant to the order adopted by the House in January, if a motion is not adopted unanimously or on division, it has to be done by recorded division. Do you wish me to call the roll?
Yes, please do.
Chair, if I may say something with regard to the motion.
We've actually were in the vote, so I would say I'm going to rule no. Unfortunately, Mr.
And
Dong.
the only reason I'm asking for the maybe just 1 minute just to explain why I'm voting this way, because I wasn't expected that we're going to be voting on this particular issue. I'm not a permanent member to the committee, so I asked for indulgence to give me 1 minute to kind of speak to it and explain myself.
Mr. Dong, you do not have a vote in this vote.
Oh, okay.
So it is
Even
just
if I
the sitting members that can do that. So
okay.
Mr. Clerk.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The question is on the motion in the name of Mr. Paul Huss. Monsieur Drouin.
Contre.
Mr. Joe Howry.
Against.
Mr. McKinnon.
No.
Mr. Weiler.
Against.
Ms. Harder.
For.
Mr. McCauley. For. Thank you. Monsieur Paul Huss.
Oui, merci.
Madame Vignola.
Oui.
Mr. Green.
In support.
Point of order, Chair.
Certainly, Mr. Dong.
Yes. I was under the impression I'm subbing for Eric, who's a permanent member.
And I apologize, Mr. Dong. I was on the impression that Mr. Fragiscatos was that individual, so I apologize for that.
Mr. Chair, I'm sorry. Yes. I haven't been informed of any substitution today vis-a-vis the Liberal Party. I don't know who's replacing Mr. Kuzmierczak, and I haven't been informed by the Chief Government Whip, which is my understanding is the protocol pursuant to the order adopted by the House. I know Mr. Fragiscatos is here, and I know Mr. Handong is here, and Mr. Bezan was here as well. But I haven't been informed officially by the Liberal Party as to who is actually replacing Mr. Kuzmierczak, which is why I didn't call either Mr. Dong or Mr. Fragiscatos. I would appreciate some clarity if there is somebody who's actually replacing him, but I haven't been informed of this. I think Mr. Fragiscatos would like to intervene, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
Certainly, Mr. Fragiscatos.
Thank you, Chair. So, colleagues, I was here from 4:30 to 5:30 for Mr. Kuzmierczak, not realizing that Mr. Dong had apparently been here as well for Mr. Kuzmierczak. So I leave it with the committee. I don't know what time the motion was put forward, but on my honor, if it was prior to 5:30, I was here and prepared to vote.
Just going to quickly just suspend for a second. I need to talk with the clerk, so just to hold for a second. The clerk has not been notified of any replacement at this point in time, and therefore neither Mr. Dong nor Mr. Fragascatos are eligible to vote at this point. So with that said, Mr. Clerk, I believe you've gone through all the call. Is that correct? Or we?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I've called on all the members who are present.
Okay.
The results are 5 in favor, 4 against.
Thank you. Motion is carried. Thank you. With that said, Mr. Paul Hughes, your time is finished, and so we will now go to I want to thank the Parliamentary Budgets Officer with bearing with us during this time. And I appreciate that, as well as to your clerks. And we will just finish up with Mr. McKinnon for 5 more minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Directeur.
Thank you very much to the Director of the Office of the Parliamentary Budget Office and my colleague for that brief spectacle. Now, you alluded on a number of occasions today to the DND's assessments. And I affirm that there are economies of scale for, when you build one single ship in, a given shipyard, there can be economies of scale, and we did open up the national program to a third shipyard and renegotiated with the Davie shipyard to become that third shipyard. And I believe that your report illustrates it well, that delays cost money. And if we are to develop new capacity for the Coast Guard or the Navy, we must go with shipbuilding on many fronts, Vancouver, Halifax, and perhaps a third shipyard, especially for icebreakers. But to come back to the ships, the vessels in question, the Navy made the assessment to combine 2 types of ships in one. It represented for them the best way to achieve those economies of scale, and to mean that the multi-purpose of their ship would allow Canada to respond to all kinds of needs, interdictions in terms of drugs, or a NATO mission, or a patrol, or humanitarian mission in the Caribbean or elsewhere in the world. It would be a ship that could carry out all these different types of mission. And during the ship construction stage to arrive at economies of scale. Now, for you, is that a reasonable assumption or theory to combine all of these capabilities in one single ship with a view to arriving at economies of scale with 15 similar ships? To have one single type of ship to make economies of scale. Yes. What we took into account in our report and taking into account economies of scale, we arrive at a $77 billion estimate. Now, if we were to change ships and have a hybrid ship, we would lose out on economies of scale. And we'd arrive at the cost we have in our report for a hybrid ship. What we did not take into account were the maintenance costs for the ship, regardless of the design chosen. We concentrated on the development and procurement aspects. So it's not unreasonable, that assumption or that theory that DND has. The fact of having one type of ship will give rise to economies of scale, and we took that into account in our assessment for procurement. But operations and maintenance are not part of our report. Do you have any comment on Mr. Paul Hoos's comment, who talked about phenomenal costs? And the irony of that assertion being a 26 million estimate. I don't think I have anything to add aside from the fact that the costs are significantly higher than they were at the outset. Are or were re-evaluated as being higher due to erroneous calculations by previous governments. I did not examine the circumstances in which the initial estimates were made, so I cannot determine if they are erroneous estimates or if the estimates were exact at that time and that costs have come about later following a switch in specifications. But we know that the costs have evolved over time. But I'm not in a position to know the history of it or to do an autopsy. But we've systematically observed with all projects under the national strategy for shipbuilding, systematically we've seen increases in all of the cost estimates. Am I not right? It's certainly the case for the combat ships and also the support. And those are the two studies for which I can speak. Yes, because I was involved in those.
And with that said, Mr. Giroux, I would like to thank you and the PBO office for coming, as well as to Ms. Malanik and to Mr. Penny for bearing with us and your succinct and very informative answers. So once again, we thank you for every time when we put out an ask for you to show up, you do so willing and so quickly. So thank you very much and appreciate that. With that said, to the committee, we were going to go into an in-camera meeting, but due to the timing, unfortunately, because of the interpreters have to be at a further meeting very soon. I'm just going to have the clerk very quickly mention to you what our schedule is for the next little while. You are aware that we had talked about getting a calendar. Ms. Vignola had asked for that, and so we are going to get that set up so that we can get that to you as soon as possible. I can tell you that on the issue of the nuke tech study, we should have a first draft of that in the by hopefully early in April, such that you can have a chance to look at that, and then we can respond to that. And I'm just going to turn it over to the clerk to just briefly give you a verbal understanding of what our next couple of meetings are about. Mr. Paul? Mr. Clerk.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. What we have planned at the moment is that on Wednesday, March the 10th, the President of the Treasury Board will appear before the committee to discuss the Supplementary Estimate C and the departmental plans as well. On our next sitting on March the 22nd, the Chair has, as part of the committee study on the government response to the COVID-19 pandemic, instructed me to invite members of the Public Health Agency of Canada and PSPC, senior officials, to discuss the National Emergency Strategic Stockpile. The Minister of Public Services and Procurement Canada has agreed to appear before the committee on March the 24th, which is Wednesday. As I explained at a previous meeting, the order of reference will have lapsed to study the supplementary estimates. However, the committee can still hear from the minister, from the minister on a subject matter study if it wishes. The next meeting we have is will be in the week of the 12th of April. And there had been some discussion with the chair about the possibility of picking up the Nuke Tech report at that time, as we anticipate that report will be distributed to the committee members in early April. We hope to make sure that the committee members have at least a week to review it before the consideration begins. As part of the committee's study on the government response to the COVID-19 pandemic, the Minister of PSPC has agreed to appear to discuss the issues related to that on Wednesday, April the 14th. And I raised this issue with the chair, who was planning on raising it with the committee today. That is all the information I have currently, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. And with that said, I do see, Ms. Vignola, that you do have your hand up. Did you have a question?
Yes, very quickly. Given that we're not meeting in camera to discuss the motions that were filed in the binder, when will we be doing that?
I think the plan that I think the clerk and I will look at is that for on this Wednesday coming up, assuming that we can stay on schedule, that we would schedule to have an in-camera meeting at the end of that meeting, if that's appropriate, and we can coordinate that. Perhaps that's when you could bring those issues up if you would like.
Well, in the eventuality that we once again be faced with the constraints due to the interpretation and not be able to address the motions in the binder, because it seems like we've got ourselves into a spiral. We're putting off just forever the discussions we need to be having.
Thank you, Ms. Vignola. There are avenues for to have those discussions that can be done in camera, as well as during the public meetings at any time, if that's what you're trying to allude to. But we can. I'm just assuming that you're concerned about motions that may have been on the floor at any particular time. Is that correct, Ms. Vignola?
I'm referring to the motions that are in the binder, that they have already been filed, and I would like to discuss these. Is it possible for me to open up the discussion on those right now?
The challenge we have right now is a question of how long they might take. But yes, you can present those motions at any time, recognizing the time constraints that we do have.
Point of order, Mr. Chair. I'd invite you to see the clock.
certainly. And I think that, I mean, I would ask that, and we are in a challenge, Ms. Vignola, you're right, very right, in the sense that because of our votes and in times gone by where we were sitting out without the app vote, where we were delaying and missing all these times for our committee meetings and to do things in camera. So that is a bit of a challenge. Challenge saw today, it was nice to have the app vote today, which definitely sped things up and minimized the length of time that we had. And, you know, it's hopefully we see that we're able to do it. The problems we have are our meetings are Monday and Wednesday. And because of the situation we're in right now, it appears that most votes come on Mondays and Wednesdays, right at the time when we are having our meetings, which makes it for a very challenging to deal with the issues that we have in front of us. But with that said, I see Mr. Drouin, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that if we are discussing motions that we are now technically outside our timelines because we should have been in camera. So I'm just, are we going to end this meeting or are we going to be moving into camera if we are to discuss those? Because Madame Vignola had plenty of opportunities to present those motions, as you've said, in her time when she could speak. Any member provided 48 hours, they can present table a motion. So I'm just wondering, what are we doing?
So, I mean, due to the constraints today, I'm going to say that time restraints are going to prevent us from going much longer than the next 5 minutes. But with that said, I would propose that perhaps that March 22nd, at this present time, that we schedule for committee business at that time, and in which case we have a more firm opportunity for such things as Ms. Vignola is proposing to be brought forward. And I've seen some thumbs up there for that proposal. No, I'm not seeing any shaking of heads. So with that said, thank you everybody for bearing with us today. With that, and I will declare the meeting adjourned.